Next question, please.
So just to play devil's advocate a little bit, we've had a bit of almost an assumption creep into this conversation that we should be funding. Why? What happens if we just stop funding everything?
Yes, there is in the private university in Buckingham, a vice-chancellor who says there should be no funding from the government for science at all. Terence Keeley, I think his name is. And they haven't tried it yet, but what if there's no funding?
Well, I mean, do you mean no funding from the government or no funding at all from anyone?
Let's clarify, let's quantify it into just the government.
Yeah, well, the way that they're doing silly buggers with the budget in America...
It's getting there.
Well, yeah, but at some stage they hadn't actually signed off on the budget for a year, and it was just being dispensed in artificial dribs and drabs. It's extraordinary that you can't actually sanction the budget in the government.
Oh, it just depends what you want society to do with its funds and how the funds should be distributed. And as you pointed out, there have been long periods of history where people did things in their basement. I actually invented, you won't believe this, but I invented high throughput sequencing in the basement of a friend's house in Brighton, Massachusetts. It was working really well until the poodle came in and wiped it out with its tail. We never got anywhere, but it was all there. We had the whole thing sorted out. And one could say, well, let that just be the driver and let the market drive itself. And, that's sort of high-level capitalism.
They can be relied upon to choose?
Well, no, they can't. I mean, well, they can if it depends what the criteria is for choosing. And if it's to make a lot of money, then that's what you'll get. But if you want to do science that isn't necessarily going to deliver something tangible that's going to make someone rich, then you either need a philanthropist or you need a very large trust fund.
So you said we can't do it without. We have to keep funding this. Is that what you're saying?
I think we choose to.
I think there's different types of research, and we ought to clarify that.
Right.
There's the kind of research that has proof of concept that a big pharma will pick up, and they, of course, will be very excited to do that. But I don't know how many people would have funded thinking about quantum theory.
Well, what about
for example,
funding someone who's looking
1920.
for little black holes?
Mm.
He's in the radiophysics department of CSIRO in Epping, and he and his mates want to find little black holes and spend an awful lot of time not finding them. And they think this apparatus was rather interesting. What if it... And they invented Wi-Fi,
Yeah, well, the issue, I think, for this gentleman is government should pick up the tab for the research that doesn't have an immediate application, that's not going to immediately attract profits, that's not going to have an immediate application, the so-called blue sky science, because I cannot see why a profit-making organisation would choose to do that unless they wanted to show, and perhaps they do, corporate responsibility, or they wanted to have a philanthropic wing, and all power to them. But until that happy day when that is absolutely much more apparent and much more vigorous, frankly, I think there is a role for government funding for funding the kind of research we mentioned earlier that eventually may have an application, but it's not immediate straight away.
Well, can I then bring it back, actually? Sorry, Jason. So at the start, we started about technology taking over us. We get sort of out of control, and even you, Baroness, were talking about the choices we're going to have to make, and these are the product of science and funding research and stuff like that, and sort of almost talking in a apocalyptic way, sort of way. But if we just stopped funding this stuff, would we actually slow down the dramas we get? I don't know.
I think we mustn't confuse science with technology, and one may have great concerns or very mixed views about the way the cyber culture is going, for example. That's not quite the same thing as trying to find out how the brain works. They shouldn't be put in the same basket.
No. Behind you, I think, is there a last question? Come forward. Lower the microphone. Excellent.
There's been a bit of talk about organising at a local level to make good decisions about futures. And I think Switzerland was stated as an example of maybe how that can happen a little bit better at a government level, but certainly... and then there's been talk about the why as opposed to the what, so making ethical choices about what it is that you want to achieve, and then the science being, you know, maybe directed towards the kind of world that you can vision. So I guess my question is, if we do have these communities who are empowered to envisage a better future and somehow make decisions that would lead towards that, in the absence of any institutionalised systems that are kind of still functioning at a very broad level, like religion and, you know, to give us our set of values, where does the wisdom come from at the local level, and how does that get taught and learnt?
How do you get a sense of direction? Jason, you said before, in answer to a similar question, that you just get on with it and see if you can get funding. Apart from the market, how would you answer that question?
I'd come back 2 steps and think, you know, I was interested in what Susan was saying about government funding and that sort of stuff. The world has changed dramatically. Governments are almost universally broke. They have no money. The only people with access to money are really companies, who in fact could pay off the national debts of most countries if they wanted to. So maybe we need to look at a change and move into more corporate funding of blue sky stuff. That devalues the role of government. And the local versus the leadership thing, I still think we're going to get a nasty wake-up call very soon, where we need some proper global leadership. And
the burning deck, in other words, which will force wisdom on you whether you like it or not.
I think so. I think we're in a race between education and catastrophe, that's for certain. And
a race between education and catastrophe.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And we need to get learning and understanding, and then maybe we'll get, when we get the understanding, we will elect the leadership we need from a local level upwards. So we need to get, at a local level, people more in touch with the ground, the reality, and then we will get the understanding, and then we'll get the leadership we need.
Iain, you look thoughtful. Or despairing.
No. Well, I think there are 2 things. I think one is that we need to address our education system, which is the, you know, powerhouse of the future. It is who we are going to be. And there isn't time in an answer now to go into the various worries about that. But I think actually producing people who are, you know, properly humanely educated would be quite a good idea. The other point I'd like to make is we've heard about governments not being in the right place, often business is not. What about philanthropists? I rather like the idea of philanthropists. They're often interesting, wacky, eccentric, highly motivated, often intelligent people who've made good somewhere, and they often like to give back. And when one actually looks back at the Middle Ages and at the Renaissance, a lot of these bishops and barons were local lad made good, who decided that it would be a very good thing to found a college or to encourage an artist or a musician or a scientist. They often didn't understand all the details of what they were patronizing, but it worked extremely well.